Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Varsity Tutors Star Course series, where today we'll be taking a closer look at one of nature's most beautiful bugs, the butterfly. We're joined today by our friends at the Butterfly Pavilion, where butterfly expert Kalai Thomas will be giving us an up-close look at these beautiful creatures and what we can learn from them. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure we are perfectly comfortable with the ecosystem of our live classroom. So you'll see a chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to use that chat panel to answer any questions that we have throughout the class and to ask any questions that you have along the way. And if we don't get to your question in real time, don't worry, we'll leave some space at the close of the lesson for Q&A with Kalai. Now, you'll also want to make sure that you have your camera close by, because toward the end of the lesson, we're going to have the opportunity to lean into the screen and pose for a selfie. And if you tag Varsity Tutors and Butterfly Pavilion on Instagram, you'll have the opportunity to win a children's book as well as a wildlife creature camp subscription. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the details of that giveaway toward the end of class, but in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to your instructor for today, Kalai Thomas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for being here with me today. We're going to have a great time talking about some of my favorite animals and ones that I get to be around all the time, which is pretty great. So as she said, my name is Kalai Thomas. I am an educator at Butterfly Pavilion, and we'll get to Butterfly Pavilion in just a little bit, but I do want to talk about what we're going to be sharing with all of you today. So we are going to be thinking about some butterflies that we might find in our backyard. And while the ones that you might be seeing right now are not butterflies you might find in your backyard, we're going to use some of my butterflies and some tropical species as examples of ones that we're going to find a little bit later. So hopefully by the end of today, you will learn about one type at least that you can find outside. But we are going to be focusing on a lot of different things today. So I'm hoping that we're going to learn to identify butterflies together. We're going to discover many adaptations butterflies use to survive. Hopefully we'll discover why butterflies are important. And we're going to end by learning how we can help butterflies and the scientists who study them. So we've got a lot to talk about today. We're definitely going to dive on in. But I did say Butterfly Pavilion is we're located in Westminster, Colorado. And even though we're called Butterfly Pavilion, we actually like to consider ourselves an invertebrate zoo. So if you think about the animals that you have seen at a zoo before, I bet they're a little different from the ones that we like to show off here at Butterfly Pavilion. So if you think about it real quick, maybe take your hand, run it down the middle of your neck or down the middle of your back, and you should be able to feel something kind of bumpy back there. That's your spine, your backbone, right? All of my animals, they don't have a spine or a backbone or any bones at all. So butterflies, no bones. We have spiders and sea stars and an octopus, all of these animals, and they all have something really important in common. And that is that they are invertebrates. They have no bones. And we like to show them off because they actually make up most of the animal species in the world. So if we were looking at this circle here and it represented every single animal in the whole world, everything in blue represents an invertebrate. Those animals with no bones, butterflies, sea stars, crabs, octopus, spiders, scorpions, all of those are represented in blue. And that little tiny orange section of the circle represents vertebrates, animals with bones. So animals like humans, you and me, dogs, cats, birds, fish, reptiles, they're really, really outnumbered by animals like the ones we like to show off here. So we do have a lot that we could talk about today, but of course, being called Butterfly Pavilion, we do specialize in some pretty special invertebrates, which will be the butterflies we'll talk about. So we do have a really large rainforest. If you do ever have the chance to visit us in Colorado, you would have a chance to walk around the rainforest with beautiful butterflies like this blue morpho that could even potentially land on you during your visit. So it's super fun and magical. But the nice thing about virtual programs like this is I get to bring some of the butterflies and teach you how to find butterflies in your own home today. So we will think a lot about that. But in order to think about how to find butterflies in our own backyards, we have to think about their life cycle and how they look at all stages of their life. So now is a great opportunity to tell me what you know about the butterfly life cycle. Go ahead and use that chat to tell me different parts you may know, how butterflies might start off, and just take a chance. It'll take a few moments, I know, to get some answers in, but you're definitely welcome to let me know now. So we're already getting some answers in. They're great. We do have a few thoughts. Some have said some great words like, it looks like caterpillar and cocoon. That's always a great one. Yep. And I want us to think about, at the very, very beginning of a butterfly life cycle, we have to think about their eggs. Butterflies and really all invertebrates, no bone animals, start their lives as eggs. And these eggs will take a couple of days to hatch, so they'll be around maybe 2 to 5. And when they do hatch, like some of you have said, they hatch into these little caterpillars. We can also call them larvae. That's kind of my sciencey word for them. And when they hatch, they are going to eat as much as they possibly can. They'll eat and grow and grow. They grow so much, it would be like if a human toddler or baby grew to be the size of a school bus by the time they were done eating. That's pretty big, right? And they can do that in a couple of weeks. So they definitely get really, really big. Once they've eaten everything that they possibly can, they're going to climb up to the top of their plant and shed their skin for the very last time to form a pupa or a chrysalis. Now, I know some of you might have used the word cocoon for this, and that's a really good word, but we tend to only use the word cocoon when we're talking about moths. So if we're talking about butterflies, we use the word chrysalis. But you can always use the word pupa. That's going to be the right word, no matter if we're talking about a butterfly, a moth, a beetle, a bee, or an ant. It's always going to be the pupa. But for butterflies, we do tend to call them chrysalises as well. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar is going to completely break down its body into this kind of liquid nutrient soup. So it's going to completely become goo, basically. And over the course of a couple weeks, it's going to reshape that goo into a beautiful butterfly. And once it's ready to come out, they will slowly put pressure on the outside of that shell and then start to pull themselves out of the cracks that they make. So you'll see this butterfly here is all ready. It's going to come right out and start to get ready to let its wings expand and grow. It's going to hang upside down like that for a couple hours. And what it's doing here is letting the blood flow into its wings for the very first time. That blood is going to kind of form scabs. Like if you've ever scraped up your knee and gotten that hard covering there, that's what butterfly wings are made of. And once they're all firm and hard, they're going to be ready to fly. So they'll have they're nice wings that'll take off, and they will be these adult butterflies. And adult butterflies actually only live about 2 to 4 weeks. So we might see some exceptions to that rule a little later, but they definitely don't live very long. I've definitely had some people tell me they think butterflies live 10, 20, 30 years, but they really only live a month, maybe 2 months on average. So now that we can kind of tell what all of these different stages of a butterfly looks like, remember, if we're looking in our backyards, we might have to look on plants for eggs or caterpillars, look at the top of the plants for the chrysalises, and of course, look on beautiful flowers and the air around us to find those butterflies flying around. Now that we understand how to find them at different points of their life, we have to be able to identify them from other animals. So butterflies are insects. And I wonder, how can we tell that an animal is an insect? If we were looking at an animal right now, what would we have to look for to see if it was an insect or not? Go ahead and put some thoughts into our chat about what you think makes an insect an insect. There's some great answers in here. Right away, one of the first ones I always see are 6 legs, right? So we have to count the number of legs. And if we're looking at a caterpillar versus an adult butterfly, they both have 6 legs, but they're gonna be a little bit different. So for the caterpillar, those red arrows are pointing to the 6 legs right up front. And even though it looks like they have legs all along the back, those are really just fake feet. They're called pseudopods. So we don't count them as legs. On my adult butterfly, it looks like we might only have 2 pairs or 4 legs. But butterflies that only look like they have 4 legs really have a secret hidden pair of legs tucked up against their body. Even if they can't use them anymore, they're so pressed up and tucked against their body, they still count as legs. So butterflies, even as caterpillars and adults, have 6 legs, so they are definitely insects. It seems like we've had a few other ideas about what might make an insect an insect. I think I saw a few people say antenna, right? So they have to have exactly 2 antennae. That one's really easy to remember because you can do 1, 2 with your fingers, and then you have your own set of antennae. On caterpillars, they're going to be really hard to see in some cases. Like this caterpillar here, they're really small. It's hard to tell. Butterflies, you can usually see them pretty well. They're really long and they're kind of stick-shaped, so we can see their antenna there. And then I think we were throwing around some other really good words. We said something like a thorax. We're starting to get into these body parts, right? We have said that they have 3 body parts, and that'll be their head. That one's pretty easy. It's where their eyes and their mouths are located, right? Then they'll have their thorax, which is where their legs, and if they have wings like the butterflies, where their wings will be attached. And then their abdomen is going to be the really long 3rd body part. And this is where all of their guts are located. So their stomachs, anything that they use like organs that are going to be inside of them are going to usually be located in their abdomens. So very important. All 3 of those body parts have very important functions for the butterfly and quite different ones, right? Some are in charge of moving, some are in charge of storing all the important parts. And it's important to make sure you spot all 3 of those in these insects. So if we're thinking about insects, that is just the kind of group of invertebrates, if we remember from earlier, right? Invertebrates are those no-bone animals. We've separated into this group called insects, so we can tell our butterflies apart from animals like spiders and snails. Now we can start putting them into even further groups where we can tell them apart from animals like dragonflies and ants and bees. And that has to do a lot with their wings. So butterflies belong to a group of animals called Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera, you can all practice saying that word at home right now, Lepidoptera. It's kind of a fancy word. Basically, when you break it down, it just means scaly wings. So if we look up really close at butterfly wings, they're made up of thousands and thousands of little scales. And it's these scales that give butterflies their beautiful colors and their patterns and helps us tell them apart from each other. There is one other insect that goes in this group with butterflies that can also be considered a lepidopteran. And I wonder if we can figure out what that insect is. See a couple of guesses for like dragonflies and bees. A lot of times they look like they have scaly wings, but their wings are really more see-through. So we're not going to think of their wings as kind of scaly. But then, yeah, I did see some of us have put in moth, right? I mentioned it a little earlier. Moths and butterflies both belong in this group called Lepidoptera. So if we're trying to find butterflies in our backyard, how can we tell them apart from moths? Well, I have a quick little game we can kind of play together to see if we can tell moths and butterflies apart. So I'm going to bring up a picture of either a moth or a butterfly, and I want you to guess which one you think it is. Some of them might be kind of easy, and some of them might be a little harder than we expect. So here's our first one. This is actually one of the biggest of its types in the world. It's from some parts of Asia. Is it a moth or is it a butterfly? It looks like we've got a lot of guesses for both, but I think this one is actually going to be a moth. It is the Atlas moth from some parts of Southeast Asia. So the biggest moth in the world. All right, what about this next one? This is a Malay cruiser. Luckily, its name doesn't give away what it is. Is it a moth or is it a butterfly? This one comes from Malaysia, so also some parts of Southeastern Asia, maybe some parts of Northern Australia. I do see a lot of responses for both. We're pretty divided, but this one is going to be a butterfly. I wonder if that surprised some of us. All right, what about this one? This is a beautiful insect from Madagascar. I wonder if it is a moth or a butterfly. All right, 3, 2, 1. That one is a moth. It's the Madagascar sunset moth. All right, what about this one? Is this one a moth or a butterfly? This one looks a lot like an animal some of you may have seen if you have visited or if you're from the southern US. But this type is actually from Kenya in Africa. So you might have a little bit of a clue if you've seen it around the southern US or the one it looks similar to. But I wonder if it's a moth or a butterfly. If you guessed moth, you're correct. It looks a lot like a Luna moth, but it is an African moon moth from Kenya. All right, we've got a few more. This one is one that we have a lot of at Butterfly Pavilion, but remember, we have more than just butterflies, so maybe that's not a very good hint. But it is really common. It's from some parts of South America, and it's got that big, very distinctive eye spot to tell it apart. I wonder if it's a moth or a butterfly. I've seen a lot of us say it's a moth. I have seen a few votes come in for butterfly, but it is a butterfly. It's an owl butterfly. Yeah. This one is from the UK, so kind of different. It's not quite a tropical species like some of the others we've thought of. It's got those big eye spots, kind of like the owl butterfly, but I wonder, is it a butterfly or is it a moth? This one is a moth. It's the emperor moth. And we'll go ahead and try one last one. This is a type of clipper. They come in a lot of different colors. This one's an iridescent or a blue clipper, but some of them can be brown or green. They do tend to have the same kind of pattern with those white spots, but I wonder if this one is a moth or a butterfly. The clipper is a butterfly. So I wonder, how did you do? Did you get a lot of them right? Were there some that were kind of tricky? Yeah, I find that the Madagascar sunset moth is really tricky for some people. It's so beautiful. Sometimes people think that butterflies are really colorful and moths are really dark and brown or kind of less colorful and more camouflaged. But from what we see here, there are some brown or darker colored butterflies. There's some really colorful moths, right? Some people think that moths always rest with their wings open, but there are some butterflies here who rest with their wings open. The best way to tell a moth apart from a butterfly is by looking at their antenna. So if a moth, they tend to have these kind of feathery antennae. They almost look fluffy, right? And a butterfly tends to have just stick-shaped antennae. So just like we imitated a little earlier with our fingers, they're very stick-shaped. And even that rule is sometimes broken, right? There are going to be some moths that just have stick-shaped antennae. This is one of the best rules, but really the only way to tell 100% of the time is by looking at their DNA, which is really hard to do when we're looking at them in our backyards. But this is a good way to get a close guess, or as close as you can without some really intense technology. So if we are able now to tell moths apart from butterflies, we have to think of a couple tools to help us tell some butterflies apart from each other. And a lot of that has to do with their adaptations and how they survive. Butterflies, they have these really interesting patterns and sometimes colors, and all of that can give us a clue as to what type of butterflies we're seeing. For some butterflies, their really bright colors or very striking patterns tell us that they are poisonous. So that top picture there, that black and white butterfly, is a paper kite butterfly. And those are pretty toxic. If you were to eat that butterfly, you'd feel kind of sick. They can't bite you or sting you or anything like that, but you definitely want to avoid eating any black and white butterflies, orange, red, yellow, any that are really bright and colorful in that way. Then there are some butterflies who are not poisonous and who would actually be pretty tasty if you were to find them and eat them. So they use camouflage to try to hide a little better. That middle butterfly there is a dead leaf butterfly, named because it looks like a dead leaf, right? It's doing a pretty good job of blending in with that plant and just looking like an unappetizing leaf that's just hanging out there. So there's plenty of butterflies that will use these patterns, like how the dead leaf butterfly almost looks like it has the vein of a leaf running through it, and some of these textures to blend in with their environments instead of standing out like the paper kite butterfly. And then there are some that are really standing out. They're not necessarily poisonous, but the blue morpho pictured at the bottom there is one that is really shiny and kind of flashy. They'll often hide with their wings closed, and then if a predator comes up, they'll flash them open and hopefully distract that predator with the shininess long enough for them to escape. These butterflies do this by having a pretty special pigment in them. It's called a structural pigment. And for a butterfly like that black and white one, they actually have black and white dye in those scales that gives them that color. But the blue morpho at the bottom, it doesn't have a blue dye. It's not actually blue. It's just the way the light is reflecting off of its wings that gives it that bright, flashy, shiny color to it. In fact, if we were to look at it kind of in different angles, we can see the color change based on how the light is reflecting off of it and how that light is changing. So this other butterfly here is showing this really well with just the different colors changing from blue to green. It's not actually blue or green, it's just reflecting light in a different way to appear that way. And then we're going to think about some butterflies that will take their adaptations to an extreme. There are some butterflies that will live high up in the mountains to avoid any predators, right? There's not a lot that lives up there, but one of them is actually the Colorado state butterfly. So where I'm from, this is our state insect, I believe. And it is actually found at elevations of up to 7,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains. So it lives so high up, there really aren't even flowers. They often feed on tree sap instead of plant nectar. And they do a really good job of avoiding predators when there's no other animals around, but just the butterflies and maybe a few rabbits or something like that. There is even a butterfly that lives at twice as high as the Colorado hairstreak at 14,000 feet. And this butterfly is from Peru and has been seen so little, I don't even have a good picture of it, or it doesn't even have a handy name to use. It's just the scientific name, Purcoleus forsteri. And there's a drawing of what it kind of looks like, but it's doing such a good job of hiding and avoiding other animals in the mountains in Peru that even scientists haven't really seen it that much. The other kind of extreme butterflies we'll go to is some of them will have longer lifespans. As I mentioned earlier, most butterflies only live about 2 to 4 weeks, right? Only about a month and a half. And a lot of this has to do with what they eat. So most butterflies are going to be drinking nectar from flowers or sugar water or fruit juices, and that's it. That would be kind of like if you or I drank energy drinks or sodas all day, every day, and that's all we ever had. Think that's a really good way to live? No, probably not, right? We should probably get some other nutrition in there. And that's exactly what butterflies like the zebra longwing at the top here or the postman down at the bottom do. They will drink nectar, but they'll also eat some pollen and add something more nutritious to their diet. So these butterflies can actually live up to 6 months. So quite a bit longer than most of the other butterflies. It pays to eat better than those butterflies. And then there are some that are just among the biggest and most colorful butterflies in the world. So birdwing butterflies are some of the largest. They're called birdwings because they are mistaken for small birds. And just like the blue morpho we saw a little earlier, they've got some flashy colors, but there's something else that makes them a little bit unique. So these butterflies actually show something called sexual dimorphism. And this fancy kind of phrase basically just means that the boys look different from the girls. So if we're looking at these pictures here, this picture, both of them are the same type of butterfly. They're both northern birdwings, but one of them is a female and one is a male. So let us know, which one do you think is which? Is number one the male or the female? Or is number two the male or the female? Which one is which? Is the bigger one up at the top, number one, the male or the female? Or is the more colorful, slightly smaller one, number two, the male or the female? Just like with our moth and butterflies, I'm seeing a lot of people who are divided, right? There are some that think both ways. There's a lot of good reasons to think both ways, but I want to remind us of a different animal we might have seen before. If we ever find a peacock, are male peacocks kind of the dark brown ones who hide, or are they kind of the big, flashy, colorful ones? Right? Male peacocks are always the big, flashy, colorful ones. They're trying to show off and find a girlfriend, right, and impress her. And then the female peacocks tend to be darker colors. They tend to camouflage more, and they have to basically hide and protect their eggs, right? And it's the same thing with these butterflies. The females are the larger ones. They lay the eggs. They have to carry the eggs, so they're much bigger. And they're also going to be darker colors, so they don't draw too much attention to themselves, so they can be safe and protect their eggs. And then the male is going to be the very flashy, colorful one, so he can show off, flutter his wings, and impress all of the female birdwings. I even have a few specimens of these birdwings here to show you kind of how they look when compared to each other here. So this top one is the same one. It's a northern birdwing and it's a male. You can kind of see just how big they are with a marker here. They're pretty big for a butterfly. Most of the butterflies I see every single day are maybe half this size. And then we'll see another one kind of down. There's another example of the male right next to the female. So again, the females are a little bit bigger. They're kind of longer than the marker here, right? Compared to the male, who's basically about the size of the marker. But the female definitely has some darker colors. She might camouflage a little bit better. And the male up there, definitely not camouflaging anytime soon, right? There are a few other species of birdwings. So the rest of these are slightly different. All of these birdwings are from some areas of Southeast Asia. This is one of my favorites. Ornithoptera croesus. I don't know its common name, but it's definitely a beautiful orange butterfly. And the one down below is one we saw kind of change color, the Raja birdwing. And as I said, birdwings are some of the biggest and most colorful butterflies in the world. So we have to look at the biggest butterfly in the world. And I'll kind of back up a little bit so we can see it even better. This is a Queen Alexandria birdwing. And we can see that one's much bigger. Some of them can get up to 1 foot long. And this is the female. So it is going to be slightly bigger than the male. Right? So even though the male is more colorful, the female is going to be bigger so she can carry those eggs and continue producing more birdwing butterflies. So those are a lot of the different butterflies we might find. We did say we were going to try to find some butterflies that we could maybe see in our backyard. And we might all be from some different places, but there are a few butterflies we could see all over. Some butterflies that take even where they live and their habitats to an extreme. So we'll go ahead and meet probably the most famous butterfly, the monarch butterfly. If you look at its pattern, it's actually pretty similar to that black and white butterfly we saw a little bit ago, but they do have that very distinct orange and black patterning. And they're most famous because of their migration. So if you've ever heard of butterflies migrating from one area to another, it might be these monarch butterflies. They definitely cover 3,000 miles in their migration, 3 different countries, and 4 generations of butterflies. So if you think about generations in your family, right, your great grandparents might be 1 generation, grandparents are a 2nd generation, your parents are a 3rd, and then you would be a 4th. So that's kind of how monarch butterflies travel. They start off in Michoacan, Mexico. And the first generation, those great grandparent monarch butterflies, will start flying north in about March. And they'll get a little bit of the ways, then they'll stop and lay eggs, right? Because they don't live very long. And a 2nd generation will take over. And then they'll get a little bit more north. These are ones I might start seeing in Colorado. They're ones that if you're along the south in Texas or even Florida, you might start seeing some of these ones. Eventually, they're going to stop probably in around June or July, lay eggs, and a 3rd generation will take over and get pretty far north. Some of these will reach parts of Canada. They'll go up the east coast of the United States. You'll see them in New York, maybe even sometimes Maine, all the way up there. And once they get as far north as they can, it starts getting to be about August or September, which means the weather is going to start getting colder, right? So they tend to die off then because they only live a couple months. And the 4th generation will take over. But the 4th generation is a little different. They will actually fly all the way back to Michoacan, Mexico, and spend the entire winter there. So not only will they fly further than any butterflies, any of the other butterflies, they'll live longer than them too. And the fun thing about that is scientists still don't really understand why that happens. They are still wondering and trying to figure out how this last group lives so much longer and flies so much further than the others. So with the monarchs there, and we can see a few of them, a lot of times when they're in Michoacan, Mexico, they will fly in these clusters of thousands. Any dead leaves you see on these trees are actually thousands of monarchs clustered together. So we can look at that again. And since these are ones that we can all pretty much share in common across the United States and parts of Canada, even parts of Mexico, right? They are one that you might have a chance to find in your backyard. But and, we've talked about a lot of different moths and butterflies today. So maybe there's a few different ones you can find where you live. In the Rocky Mountain region, we can see the Colorado hairstreak, of course. In kind of the southern US, you're more likely to find that zebra longwing, those really long-lived butterflies, or even some of the more tropical species as well. But there is kind of a big portion of this map I missed, right? Right in the middle of Europe, some northern parts of Africa. And that's because the last butterfly I have for you today is the painted lady. And some of you may be very familiar with the painted lady. You may have raised them from caterpillars. Let us know if you raised any of these butterflies and let them go. But they are found on every single continent except Antarctica and South America. So these butterflies are really worldwide. You see them in Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, parts of Australia, and they are all over the place. They're sometimes mistaken for monarchs because they've got that orange and black, but you can kind of see the difference here, right? They've got the spotting more than the stripes of the monarch. And they're even thought to have maybe a longer migration than the monarchs just in Europe instead of North America. But that's still kind of up for debate. There are some scientists who think that it is longer, some scientists that think it's probably shorter, but they're definitely still looking into it. There's about 6 generations, I believe, that do the migration in Europe. And part of why there might be some mysteries is because just like the Peru butterfly and the Colorado hairstreak, they live in high altitude areas. So this butterfly is extreme in a few different ways. And they like to live up in the Alps in Europe. They might fly along some of the higher mountain ranges, which might be why it's harder for scientists to find them and understand their migration. But it is important for us to kind of transition and think about why butterflies are important. Why would we all sit here today and talk about these butterflies at all? They're beautiful, but is there anything else that we can think of? If you have some thoughts on why butterflies are important, go ahead and put them in the chat for me, and we will see what you have, what ideas you have. And there's maybe a little inspiration here, right? I see a lot of us are getting in a few variations of the word pollinate or pollinators, right? Butterflies are pollinators. So if they're drinking nectar, they're going to be resting on flowers. And while they're resting there, they'll be gathering pollen on their bodies. If they visit other flowers, they're going to help pollinate as well. So just like bees, and beetles and flies can be good pollinators, butterflies are really important pollinators as well. They help these plants get pollen from different plants and produce seeds, which helps these plants produce even more flowers, right? And one thing that I don't know I saw too much, butterflies are important parts of their food chains. I know it might be kind of weird or sad to think about, but there are a lot of animals that depend on butterflies as their food source. A lot of butterflies that, or a lot of birds that eat these butterflies and need them as part of their diet. So even though we don't really like to think about maybe butterflies dying or something, there is a really good purpose to them dying in some cases when they're eaten by other animals that rely on them. So we have to think about how all animals have an important role in their different food chains and ecosystems. And there are some populations of butterflies that have been declining or that have been really needing help recently. There are a few things we can do to help them, of course. Citizen science is a really big thing that you can take part of. The idea behind citizen science is that, you know, one scientist couldn't collect information about butterflies in every single state or in every single place, right? So they need some help, and you and me can help them out by doing a little bit of data collection. So this includes things, especially there's a lot for the monarchs. So if you are really interested in monarchs, there's definitely a lot of options for those. Even something as simple as just writing down every time you see a monarch and sending it into a scientist. There's a project called Journey North that helps you keep track of that and send in these sightings to scientists so they can help understand their populations. There's some that are a little more involved, like Monarch Watch, which actually catches and tags monarch butterflies with stickers, so that way we can track them. If you're interested in this one, you can sign up for it, and scientists will send you a bunch of stickers and teach you basically how to catch and tag these butterflies to understand where they go. That's part of how we understand that there are some butterflies in the northern US that fly all the way to Mexico because someone put a sticker on them that had a number, and then that same butterfly with that same number was found in Mexico. So there are a few ways this helps us understand their migrations. There's even ones that focus more on finding larvae and eggs, right? We said that butterflies look different at all points of their life, so it's important to understand their populations at all points of their life. Monarch Larva Monitoring Project focuses on larvae and eggs on milkweed plants, which is what the caterpillars of monarchs will eat. There's also some that don't have a lot to do with monarchs. Butterflies and moths of North America is just a general database that collects all kinds of information on butterflies and moths. So this is another one where if you just see a certain type of butterfly, some of them you can take pictures of them and send them into scientists so they understand what butterfly it was and where it was found. And then there are some for the painted ladies as well, since we're still trying to understand those migrations. There's a worldwide painted lady migration citizen science project that focuses on recording information about the painted ladies and where they're from, and if they have a migration that's longer than the monarchs. And if you're not really a sciencey person, you don't want to collect data or sit outside and watch for butterflies, right? There are some other things you can do too. Building pollinator gardens and planting really good nectar flowers and host plants. Host plants are things that baby caterpillars will eat. Even just having planted one can really help butterflies. So either you can build a garden in your backyard, or if you have an apartment like me, you can put just one pot outside your front door with a good nectar plant in it, and that usually helps them out a lot. There's a really great resource here, www.pollinator.org/guides. You can go to this website, and if you're from parts of the United States and Canada and type in your zip code, it'll give you good ideas for what good native plants you can plant in your area and ones that are really good for animals like bees and butterflies. So it's a great resource for finding those specific plants for your area. And we're almost done here. I do want to finish up with something before we move on to our question and answer time and our selfie time. But I want you to walk away with this idea, right? Sometimes it can be hard to feel like you can do something or that your efforts matter to the butterflies. And if you ever feel like that, I want you to think of this little butterfly here. This is an island marble butterfly that's located on San Juan Island off the western coast of the US and Canada, so up north by parts of Washington and Oregon. And this butterfly was thought to be extinct for 100 years. The last sighting of it was in the early 1900s, and nobody had seen it for a long time until someone found one in the late 90s. And then through efforts of volunteers and scientists going out, planting their host plants, making observations on them, and really trying to understand their populations, they have actually increased their numbers in the past 30 years to the point where they aren't even on the endangered species list anymore. So we went from thinking this butterfly was extinct to it not even being endangered. And it all was because of efforts by scientists and volunteers helping those scientists that made this butterfly survive. So if you ever think that just planting your little plant outside your front door isn't helping, I assure you it really is. So with that, that's all that I have for me to focus on, but I do want to transition now to our selfie time and our bit of question and answer time. So we will go ahead and move on to that.
All right. Thank you so much, Kalei. That was so wonderful. We're going to go ahead and get ready for that selfie. And as you guys take just a moment to do so, as a quick reminder, if you go ahead and post those selfies on Instagram and you tag us here at Varsity Tutors, as well as Butterfly Pavilion, you'll have the opportunity to win not only a children's book, but also a subscription to Wildlife Creature Camp, where you'll get a little more of an introduction to all sorts of creatures, from the scaly and sometimes scary to the winged and wonderful. And you'll also have the chance to participate in some unplugged after camp challenges and learn from celebrity instructors. So definitely be sure to post those tags on Instagram. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass things back off for that selfie.
Awesome. Yeah. So for our selfie, I'm going to hold up the Atlas moth, which was one of our the ones we used for our game where we tried to figure out if they were moths or butterflies. And we'll get some good pictures with this. It is one of the largest moths in the world. So you can see my hand. It's bigger than my hand there. Definitely bigger than our marker we use to measure our butterflies. So definitely get your chance to take your selfie with the biggest moth in the world. It's kind of fun. You can see the edges of their wings. Some people think this little edge here looks like a snake head. So they think maybe Atlas moths have tried to camouflage or scare off predators in that way by looking like a part of a snake. And I know some of you may have been wondering, as you've seen some of these specimens today, like this moth and the butterflies we looked at a little earlier, I want to assure you all, we don't ever kill butterflies or things like that to use them for programs like this. Since butterflies and moths don't live very long, this Atlas moth probably only lived about a week, and that's their entire lifespan. Since they don't live very long, sometimes we do get to save some of them and use them in education programs like this. And I like to think of it as them getting kind of a second life through education. So they definitely lived a really long and happy life here at Butterfly Pavilion, and then we get to use them for these education programs.
Wow, that was so cool. Thank you so much, Clay. And if
course.
you didn't get a chance to snap that selfie just yet, we're going to stay for just a couple of minutes of Q&A. So by all means, feel free to lean into the screen and do so. We had some really wonderful questions from students, and you actually did a fantastic job of answering most of them toward the end of the presentation. We had lots of students who wanted to know more about how they can help, what sorts of plants they can plant to help these butterflies. And as kind of a counterpoint to that, we also had some students who were wondering what sorts of things we can do to keep squirrels and other animals that will potentially get in the way of those butterfly gardens from keeping those butterflies away.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there are some things we can do if we're building pollinator gardens. A lot of times you can build in plants that deter animals like squirrels and especially deer. So I think like bee balm is a really good plant that is kind of stinky to deer and things that want to eat are like vegetable gardens, but they're also a really good plant that attracts butterflies. So a lot of those answers have to do with doing a lot of research and finding out both what works for your area and what works for the butterflies and deters those other animals. So I could give you a really long list of things that work for Colorado, but I don't know that that would be relevant to everybody. So it definitely depends on what works for your area for sure.
Cool. So I guess plants that seem appetizing to butterflies don't always seem so appetizing to other animals along the way.
Sometimes, yeah. And the bee balm is a really good example. I think bee balm is actually one that works across a lot of the United States, but it's kind of stinky to some animals, like especially deer. They don't like eating it. So it does deter some of them, but definitely butterflies aren't bothered by it. They love the flowers that it produces. So
very cool. Now, I know you introduced us to a whole bunch of different varieties of butterflies, of moths. Do you have a personal favorite that you'd like to tell us a little bit about?
Definitely have a personal favorite. You all might have to look this up, but it is called the Malachite butterfly, just like the gemstone, so malachite. But it is a beautiful butterfly that's lime green and black on the inside of its wings and turquoise and orange on the outside of its wings. So definitely a really beautiful and interesting butterfly to see.
Very cool. Now, you touched on this a little bit, but we had lots of student questions around different ways that butterflies help the ecosystem. I know you mentioned a little bit around them, both unfortunately and fortunately, being a part of the food chain in that system. So could you talk a little bit more with us about how they're a part of this ecosystem, and in particular, if there are any other predators to these butterflies outside of the birds that you mentioned?
Yeah, so they are definitely important. They're kind of that lower end of the food chain, right? Where they're not quite plant eaters or herbivores because they don't destroy the plants when they eat them. They're really only getting the nectar from them. But they are important as that pollinator kind of part of it. So they help the plants reproduce and create even more plants. But then they are definitely going to be eaten by a lot of things, a lot of predators that rely on them as their food source. And for the most part, that is just going to be birds. If you think about where to find butterflies, the animal that's going to be able to eat them the most often are birds because they fly just like the butterflies. And if they are up in trees or things like that, it's going to be easier for the birds to get them than some others. But there are some animals that if they can catch them, they might try to eat them, like a lizard or any kind of mouse or rat or things that would eat insects normally. Probably wouldn't shy away from eating a butterfly. It's just a matter of being able to catch them or not, which is the tricky part.
Absolutely. I had a really cool question come in from someone who purchased some painted ladies and set them free and was wondering whether it potentially runs into any trouble when we set free animals that we didn't take from that particular spot in terms of that research you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are always going to be issues with some things like that, especially if we think about maybe there were some pests or parasites that were introduced when they were under human care and then they were released. For painted ladies specifically, since they are so widespread and so popular, they're really not going to be too much of an issue when they're released, and in some ways just kind of help our ecosystems, right? Because they are either going to produce more butterflies out in the wild and increase their populations, which is good for the flowers and for those predators, right? So in most cases, that's going to be good, but you're right to think about it a little more carefully, right? We don't always want to just release our goldfish into the rivers and things when we don't want them. We have to be careful about what things we are releasing and not.
Awesome. And it sounds like the overarching theme is make sure to do the research. So,
Yeah,
you know, seek out those resources and make sure that you're making a call.
For sure. I won't have the answers for everybody, but if you're doing the research and figuring it out, you'll be able to find out what works for your area, for sure.
Absolutely. Now that is about all the time that we have, but do you have any final closing thoughts? I know you've already provided some really wonderful resources for students interested in next steps, interested in getting more involved, but any closing thoughts for students who want to learn more?
Yeah, if you want to learn more, you're always welcome to first off visit our website, and we sometimes have a chrysalis cam set up. So if you want to try to watch some of those butterflies come out in real time, that's a great step to take. But we're also happy to be a resource. So there's plenty of emails for like our butterfly zookeeper, for our education team, and you're always welcome to send us questions that you have about butterflies that way as well. So there are a few resources out there for the plants, the butterflies, and everything you would like to know to continue on and make sure you're helping the ecosystem and the butterflies thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again, Calais. And thank you to the entire team at Butterfly Pavilion for joining us and for being a part of this lesson. Thanks for those of you who tuned in and asked so many thoughtful questions. We had a lot of really great questions about pollinators in general that branched a little bit away from just butterflies. So for students who are interested, we will be back with Butterfly Pavilion on June 16th to give us some insight into the wonderful world of one of our most precious pollinators, the bee. So we hope to see you guys back then. And in the meantime, we hope you'll check out some of the other STAR courses in our STEM Success series. Thanks once again to everyone. And don't forget to post those selfies and tag us at Varsity Tutors and Butterfly Pavilion to win. Thanks, everyone.